The great triumph of the emperor who built Russia from zero. Can you imagine a 10-year-old child exiled from the palace, growing up to transform a backward, isolated country into a mighty empire that forced all of Europe to pay respect? That story is true. And that figure is Peter the Great, the emperor who led Russia out of the medieval shadow and into the light of civilization. In the late 17th century, Russia was almost completely cut off from the rest of Europe. The entire nation was steeped in archaic customs. Men wore beards down to their chests, nobles sported baggy robes, and the people lived in poverty and fear. They had no navy, no industry. They didn't even have a complete map of their own country. Russia was just a distant eastern kingdom, viewed by European nations as barbaric. Yet it was in that gloomy era that a thin, restless, and curious young boy, Pyotr Alexeyevich Romanov, emerged. Peter was not like the other princes. He didn't like sitting on the throne. He didn't enjoy lavish ceremonies. He preferred taking things apart, tinkering with gears and screws, and specifically he was obsessed with Dutch wooden boats. When he was just over 10 years old, Peter left Moscow, escaped the palace intrigues, and began living among common people, where he learned how to build ships, use a hammer, saw, and compass. Years later, people would still say, Peter was not just the emperor of Russia, he was the first person to teach Russia how to dream. In 1689, at the age of 17, Peter returned to Moscow and overthrew his half-sister Sophia, who had seized his throne. Shortly after, he officially became the Tsar. But instead of indulging in luxurious power, he spent most of his time studying and adopting Europe's advanced model. He disguised himself as a common carpenter. He traveled thousands of miles to Holland, Germany, and England to observe firsthand how Europeans built ships, constructed homes, and forged weapons. It is said that for months, no one realized that the big workman with calloused hands was, in fact, the king of Russia. He worked 12 hours a day in shipyards, ate dry bread, and slept in storage rooms, all for a single aspiration: to open a window to the sea for Russia. Upon his return, he brought back countless ship blueprints, technical books, and hundreds of European experts. Peter began the greatest reform in Russian history. He built a modern army, established the first navy, and opened shipyards, schools, and science institutes. He issued an order: all nobles and officials must shave their beards and wear European-style clothes. For Russians at the time, it was a massive cultural shock. They protested, they cursed, but Peter remained resolute. If Russia wants to step into the future, it must change, starting with its own people. However, to open that path to the sea, the symbol of integration, Peter needed to do something almost impossible: defeat Sweden, the #1 military power in Europe at the time. The Great Northern War lasted for 21 years. In the early years, Russia was defeated disastrously. The army of young King Charles X crushed Peter's forces at Narva. But instead of despairing, he turned defeat into a lesson. Peter never feared losing. He only feared stopping. He rebuilt the army, forged new weapons, and taught soldiers to fire in European formations. In 1709, in the historic Battle of Poltava, Peter and the Russian army crushed the Swedes, forcing Charles V to flee to the Ottoman Empire. From then on, Russia officially became an empire, a force that all of Europe had to reckon with. After the victory, Peter built a new city right in the northern swamp, St. Petersburg, Russia's gateway to the world. This city became the symbol of the ambition of a nation once considered backward. He famously said, "I have opened a window to Europe." And indeed, that window changed the destiny of an entire nation. But Peter was not just a military man. He was a social, scientific, and cultural reformer. Under his reign, Russia began to have newspapers, libraries, museums, hospitals, universities, and the first National Academy of Sciences. He encouraged commoners to study, sending students to Europe. He allowed women to participate in social events. reduced the status of the nobility, and increased the rights of the common people. He reformed the administrative system, reduced bureaucracy, and promoted talent. Economically, Peter boosted the production of iron, steel, metallurgy, and shipbuilding, exporting goods across Europe. He also implemented extremely practical policies, encouraging agriculture, building canals, and establishing trading ships. A Russia that went from not knowing how to build ships, having no seaports, was now a nation with the strongest navy in the Baltic region. Yet behind that brilliance was a lonely man. Peter had almost no close friends because he lived so differently from everyone else. He constantly had to fight against the very noble class of his own country, those who resisted change. He once exclaimed, "I do not know who is friend or foe, but I know that Russia needs me to continue." In the winter of 1724, when a ship was stranded outside the Gulf of Finland, Peter did not order his guards to rescue it. He jumped into the icy water himself, pulling the rope and saving the sailors. He caught a severe cold. A year later, at the age of 53, he passed away, not on the throne, but in wet, cold clothes, his hand still clutching a notebook of unfinished projects for Russia. More than 200 years later, when the world asks, who is the greatest person in Russia? The people do not choose Lenin nor Stalin, but Peter the Great. Because he didn't just expand territory, he expanded mindset. He didn't just build a city, he built a national vision. What he left behind was not a throne, but a spirit, the spirit to dare to learn, dare to change, dare to dream big. An empire can be mighty through weapons, but it can only be great through knowledge and aspiration. And Peter gave Russia that, starting from zero. Perhaps the greatest lesson from Peter the Great is this: if you want to change destiny, don't wait for the times, create the times yourself. For only by daring to step beyond one's own limits can a person or a nation truly ascend and touch greatness.